there are two places where we can say that there is doubt. One is the doubt in the execution of the crime, and the other one is the doubt.
Let's assume there's no doubt in that. Okay, so it's very clear. We know he clearly broke into there. There wasn't doubt, for example, that he thought that it was his house for some reason. It was very clear. So now we're making it very clear that it's established that he stole something. There's no question that it was of its value. No question that it was preserved in a safe place or not. And let's assume that's all there, right? So now the only question is the relationship between husband and wife, is that a cause for doubt or not?
Yeah, so the way I understand it is that then the doubt is in the had punishment for that crime.
Correct. And so we would never do a had punishment in that scenario, right? So where's the historical case of that is Sayyidina Umar allegedly banning the had punishment in a time of famine. Why? Because when I steal from you or I steal from the Bayt al-Mal and I'm dying of starvation, I am actually allowed to do that. So for example, I'm on the brink of starvation. 2 weeks I haven't eaten a single morsel. I come up to you and say, Atif, please give me some food. I am actually dying. And you say, no, I'm actually allowed to fight you for your food if you have enough for yourself. Let's say, for example, you ate 2-3 days ago. I haven't eaten for 2 weeks. Okay. So if you have enough for yourself and your family, I can actually fight you for that. I can actually, physically take it. And so there is a shubha, so whether or not I can break into your house and take it from a hidden place, from a stored place, as in technically a theft would happen legally, it's not quite the same. But the point is it's not clear. There's a side to it which gives a doubt about it. Same thing with the Bayt al-Mal. If I break into Bayt al-Mal, like this is in Les Miserables, the famous Victor Hugo novel, right? Where he, what does he do? The protagonist steals from the church, right? And so he steals 2 candles and runs away from the church. And then they catch him the next day. And then the priest is like, well, at the end of the day, why do we have property in the church? We have property in the church to give to the poor, and you're poor. So there is no issue here. We're not going to press any charges, right? So that kind of, so is that halal? It's not halal. You can't do that, right? So even though you're under duress, you have to take the proper means. But there's doubt now. There's doubt. As opposed to a husband stealing from his wife, where is the doubt? Here's the problem, And so the Shafi'is, maybe other schools have otherwise, they say that this is not considered a doubt, and his hand would be cut off for that. And we would apply, even though it's kind of related to her. It's not related, it's your wife, it's different. If it's your father's, maybe, if your son's, maybe, but there's no doubt now.
Okay.
It's just an example, just an example.
Yeah, it's the concept that I wanted to understand.
Hamza, just make sure your wife knows, so she can apply the rule properly. Which is important actually. When we think about that, this is quite striking. Quite important. That a woman is financially independent. It's quite an important idea. Okay. Any other questions? Fahad,
no.
Tariq. Okay, so let's start today. So lesson 2, we want to talk about, inshallah, it's shorter today. Talk about Islamic ethics, jurisprudence, and Islamic law proper. Okay, so what does that mean? We're talking about the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law versus the court. 3 separate independent systems, and then the conflict within those systems, inshallah. Okay, so the spirit of the law. So what is the point of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending us the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The point is to guide us to believe in Allah and to have hearts filled with love and awe of Allah. That's the whole point. That is the whole point of the Sharia. It has no other goal, right? That's the whole point of the Sharia. That's the whole point. Now, that's the core goal. So it's very unsad when you read, for example, a book in ethics, and you read about Islamic ethics. They say Islamic ethics is about halal and haram. It's not about halal and haram. That's not about Islam. It's not Islamic ethics, right? So in Islamic ethics, when we talk about ethics, we're not talking about halal, haram, makruh. We're not talking about that. Things are either one of 5 categories. No, that's something else, right? You are either turning to Allah or turning away from Allah. One of the two. That's ethics, right? So in the proper ethic microscope, the makruh and the haram are the same, and the khilaf al-awla are the same. So what does that mean? You do something sinful, you go and drink wine, that's bad. You do something offensive. You don't pray witr, for example. That's bad. Or haram, but according to the Hanafis, right? Don't pray witr. But anyway, drinking standing up, for example, offensive. Okay, or something else like that. Urinating standing up, for example. Okay, this is something bad. So morally, it's bad. Okay. Similarly, not doing what Allah loves. For example, you could have recited another page of the Quran, but you don't. Right? And so when we talk about morals, we're talking about turning to Allah and turning away from Allah. So where do we read about Islamic morals? We talk about Islamic morals in the science of tasawwuf. The science of tasawwuf. So why is it that people are like, oh yeah, I'm a Sufi, I'm not really into like, Sharia. So what they mean is they're talking about, they believe in Islamic ethics. Yeah, well, we all believe in Islamic ethics. That's what we see. The Prophet ﷺ, he taught us 3 separate systems at the same time. There is Islamic ethics, and there is the halal and haram, the hard line of it, and then there is the court. 3 separate systems. So we always have to have that in mind. We always have to have that in mind. What do we have? So it's not it's not exactly the same thing. But the Prophet saying Jibreel, he came and they asked about iman. Right, iman is a separate science in reality, and then Islam, which is the law itself. Okay, and then there is ihsan, which is the ethics. So, and ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarahu, that you worship Allah as if you're standing before Him. That is the point of the Sharia. That is the point of Hajj. That's the point of marriage. That's the point of every single thing in life. That's the point of work. Everything. That's the point of us being here. Okay, and ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarahu, that you should worship Allah with love and awe. That's the whole point. Now, for which reason the Sharia comes along, there is a system, there is a practical outward shell which prioritizes that and says, at all costs, religion, meaning believing in Allah and worshipping Allah with a pure heart, must be preserved. Right? So we have the core goal in the middle, that is the core ethic, just one ethic really, right? Which we call it theocentric ethics. Right, when we're talking about ethics, for example, when in philosophy or in law or religion, whatever, so it's a theocentric, right? Theocentric meaning revolving all around God, right? As opposed to anthropocentric, right? So often Christian ethics is described as anthropocentric, in that it's all about, for example, it's not about following the laws of the Torah. It's about being nice to people. Okay, so anthropocentric, and so we don't believe that being nice to people is good. We believe that turning to Allah is good. And by turning to Allah and asking Allah, what do you want me to do? Allah wants you to be good to people, right? So our ethics are theocentric. It's all about turning to Allah. That's what it's about. The Kaaba is the thing of that thing. We are making tawaf around Allah the whole time, right? Our whole world, everything revolves around that. Okay, so ethics are very, very simple. It's not about 5 and 4 and whatever. That's something else. That's to do with the structure of the law. Right? So we have the inner core, which is standing before Allah in complete adoration, humility, awe, love, hope, etc. That's the goal. And then we have the next circle, which is the next circle, which are the Sharia, the maqasid of Sharia, the things that Sharia tries to achieve. So number 1, obviously religion, and then along with them, other things that we need to do. So we need to be alive, of course, to actually be Muslims. To worship Allah, you have to be alive. You have to be sane. If you're insane, you can't do that. To stay alive, you also have to have property, and to stay alive, you also have to have preserve your lineage and have sexual decency. And I'll explain one of these together. So when we look at the Sharia, as I mentioned last week, we identify 2 things, right? So we have our qawaid usuliyya, we have our interpretive principles. We apply them to the primary text, as we mentioned last week, and then we get conclusions, right? We look at these conclusions, halal, haram, and we get systems, right? We identify systems, okay, which we call qawaid al-fiqh. And we mentioned some of those last week. But then there are the bigger systems. The bigger systems are, for example, preserving religion, preserving life, preserving sanity, preserving property, and preserving lineage or sexual decency, we can say, your ird. And so these are the bigger systems, right? The bigger systems. So these are the goals. So what does that mean is everyone being Muslim. So when we say religion, not preserving religion as a concept, but Islam itself, right? So making sure that everybody is Muslim. Everyone keeping to the commands of Allah, so obeying the Sharia is also part of that goal. and Islam remaining for the next generations, right? These are all part of this, like the primal, number one kind of goal of Sharia. Then we have the other ones are clear: staying sane, property, keeping your property, having right to property, for example, fundamental thing. But just explain this idea: al-ird, your lineage or sexual decency. So it's quite a general concept. What does it mean? It means the right to know who one's family is. So who's your dad? I don't know, and I don't care, and it's irrelevant. No, that's important. Who's your mum? That's important. Who's your child? Who isn't your child? Right? So lineage, who's my father and who isn't my father? Right? That's a very important thing. Right? It's a very important thing. It's not as important as deen, but it's extremely important. The Sharia protects it from many, many, many angles, as we'll demonstrate in a second. Okay. The right to be not sexually abused. So, for example, what is it? What is it that when I say I'm going to walk down the street, and I don't, as a man or a woman, I don't want anybody, for example, shouting sexual innuendos at me. Okay, so does it damage my property? No. Does it change my faith? No. Does it have anything to do with my lineage? No. But I have a right that not happen to me, and also to my family. So I have a right that nobody rapes my daughter, for example. I have a right that nobody comments on my daughter, touches my daughter, or something like that. I have a right. So my family and myself, right? My wife and her family, my daughter and her family, my son and her family, each individual, they have a right to these things. This is called ird, right? This is called your ird. You have a right to that, right? This is called your ird, right? Your lineage, and also sexual decency. It's not just lineage, right? The right not to be touched by some random person, right? The right not, for example, your pictures to be put on some website without your permission, for example, right? Or these kind of things. So these are rights. Now they are secondary to, for example, usually secondary to life. We'll see the conflicts at the end of the lesson, but it is very, very important. These are something the Sharia protects from many angles. It's not just something irrelevant, right? It's very important. So what are these? And then, so how does the Sharia then protect religion? For example, number one is given precedence over everything else. So preservation of religion is number one. Right? Making sure that you are a believer is number one. It's never ever risked under any scenario. Never ever risked, right? And there's many things, practical things. For example, having the adhan, right? So the adhan is a sunnah, right, to call the adhan, but it's also, according to many scholars, it's legally has to be done in a Muslim country. You have to call the adhan, right? And here we're looking at a picture of Turkey, right? Many of us might know, for example, under the Ataturk, kind of regime and the laws, the adhan was banned, and then people were imprisoned for calling the adhan. Why were they so keen on calling the adhan? Because it is this outward sign of religion, this kind of preservation. At the end of the day, we are actually Muslims, right? Having people call the testimony of faith. So what's the difference between a group of people who believe and a group of people who outwardly testify to religion? It's very important. It's about the preservation of religion, about making a political, religio-political statement. Praying in the mosque, same thing. Having the mosque 5 daily prayers, right? That's also it's not. It's for the individual. It preserves their religion at long term, but also on a societal level, it's important. Commanding the right and forbidding the wrong, right? So on a personal, on societal level, command the right, forbidden wrong. Somebody lies, you tell them don't lie. Somebody swears, you tell them don't swear. And then the police can get involved as well. Someone's stealing, you tell them not to do that. These kind of things. Islamic scholarship, the fact that it's a communal obligation to have people who memorize the Quran, people know the halal, haram, these kind of things, right? Making sure that people personally know their obligatory knowledge. Do you as an individual know your halal, haram? So here are these little particulars, and this is not an exhaustive list at all. It can go on for pages and pages and pages, but certain things in the Sharia that are placed there, and they clearly, have us protect religion, for example. The fact that, for example, a Muslim woman, as we'll talk later on, for example, cannot marry a non-Muslim man, right? And because there was a risk to her religion. And for the same token, because of the risk to religion, many modern scholars say it's actually haram, sinful for a man to marry a non-Muslim woman as well, because of the risk for the children's religion, right? Which is a case argued by certain people. So again, whenever we see a risk to religion, I fear for their faith, we always say stop, right? Stop. We don't go there. For example, pushing your kids too hard. If I tell them to pray, he's going to leave Islam. If I tell her to wear a hijab, she's going to leave Islam. So where's the priority, right? We never risk someone leaving Islam ever, right? We never do that. And so we always, appease that goal. We don't necessarily appease their whims, but we appease that goal. Muslims only under Muslim control and influence, for example, right? Generally speaking, it is not ideal. It's not part of the Sharia goals that, for example, Muslims live under non-Muslim rule, or that you're under non-Muslim authority. For example, it's forbidden to sell Muslim slaves to non-Muslims. Right? Slavery doesn't exist anymore. But those Muslims in West Africa, there were many of the slaves that came to the Americas were from West Africa. They were doing something haram. Why did you sell Muslims to non-Muslims? And what happened to them? Some of them tried to keep their religion, but many of them lost it, right? And so that's something that's not acceptable. You can't do that. You can't put a Muslim under non-Muslim control, right? Generally speaking, there are many exceptions, but generally speaking, you can't do that. How the Sharia defends life. For example, the eye for an eye law. If I know that if I kill somebody, I may be killed. The laws of self-defense. The fact that if someone's trying to kill you, you're allowed to defend yourself, and actually, ultimately, you may end up killing the other person to preserve your own life. Right? Having for example, a standing army, having the Muslim Common Fund to support people, making sure that an obligation on fathers to support their dependents, otherwise people would die of hunger. Right? These basic, and countless things like this. Sanity, right? This is second only to religion and life, right? So if I could either die or die and lose sanity, or if I'd either lose my religion or lose my sanity. You prefer losing your sanity than to losing your deen, right? That's a priority, right? Is never risked losing. You can't do that. And for example, things like alcohol and drugs are prohibited, right? And there'll be other scenarios as well where, for example, someone is pushed so much that there's a risk for that sanity. We'd say the Sharia changes for them because there is a risk of their sanity, for example. Can everybody see me? You can't. Sorry, I didn't have my camera on, did I? Can you see me now? Apologize. Lineage and sexual decency, for example. Why is it that dating is forbidden? Right. Same thing. Does dating always lead to a mix-up of lineage? No, it doesn't. Right. But it's a right, for example, of a family. I have a right as a father that my daughter doesn't go and hang out with her boyfriend. That's a right I have. Right. It's just a decency. Similarly, the chance of something happening, dating really resulting in extramarital sex, resulting in conception, resulting in a mix-up of lineage, is a problem, right? It is a reality, right? And so seclusion, similarly, seclusion with the opposite sex. Why is it that the case? So it has various reasons, right? But one of these things is so-and-so was alone with so-and-so, and now it's alleged that that's actually, this child is not this person's child. So remove all these things and defend that idea. Say we don't do that, and we make sure things are very clear. Touching being forbidden, so touching the opposite sex, skin-to-skin contact the opposite sex without for example, medical need or something like that. This is forbidden because it can lead to these things. Looking with lust. Why is it forbidden to look with lust at the opposite sex who's not your spouse? Because again, it can lead to these things. Why is marriage, the system of marriage there? Right? For this very reason. The waiting period, right? You divorce a woman, why does she have a waiting period? To make sure she's not pregnant, so that when she gets married again, right? Which is perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine for a divorced woman to get married again. Perfectly Islamic, nothing against it at all. That we say, this is so-and-so's child, this is so-and-so's child, right? Witnesses for the wedding, the marriage happened, I should say marriage really, so that everybody says, yes, this happened, right? Ishar, right? That you have a big party, right? Why is it sunnah to have a walima? right? Have a big party, so-and-so married so-and-so, everybody went to the party, everybody knows about it, everybody heard it, everyone was there, and then there's a child, we know whose child this is, right? The right to public imprecation, right? So when a man catches his wife in bed with a man and doesn't have 4 witnesses, he can do public imprecation, right? To defend his lineage. So otherwise, what evidence does he have this is not my child, for example? Things like this. And so there are many other things here, but just a few lists of how the Sharia protects lineage and sexual decency. The issue with these, the spirit of the law is very, very vague. It's very vague. So it's out there. I know what it is as a concept, but as a tangible, applicable thing, it's not, it's vague. It's observable, but it's vague. It's not really like, when I say, for example, I come along and explain to a non-Muslim, I say, yeah, Muslims don't believe in having kind of relations outside of marriage because, of mix-up of lineage. It's like, well, DNA testing? I mean, what's the big deal? And so exactly how they work is not really very clear. And so they're quite vague, right? They're observable, but they're kind of vague. They're not measurable. You can't really put a line there. You can't say, if you just have the concept there, you can't really put a line. Yes, the line has been crossed. Where exactly is the line, right? So these are essential. They're there, right? But they're not very measurable, right? So it's like someone saying, is love in a marriage important? Say, of course. Okay, well, is it measurable? Like, can you measure it? Can you count it? Can you put a line around it? Say, no, but it's essential, right? And so while these things are very, very important, you can't actually work with them on a practical level. You can't actually work with them on a practical level. We see them there, but you can't actually work with them on a practical level. So they are essential, and without them, the religion would die. If you pray and you're not turning to Allah with your heart, there's no point in the prayer. If you are married to a prostitute and you're pimping her out on a monthly basis, and the mere fact that you're married to her and you're just saying these are my children, what's the point? You're clearly not keeping to the Sharia, right? For which reason, for example, certain modern scholars in the Middle East have prohibited halal dating. So what's halal dating? When you marry a woman and you agree, listen, we're just going to live separately and I'm not going to support you, and just make it halal. Why have they forbidden it? Right? Certain scholars, by no means consensus, but certain scholars in a particular social setting have forbidden this because it doesn't really fit with the goals of the Sharia, which is, here's a family, because not everybody would know about it. Your parents not really involved, your family's not involved. There's a child, you decided to split up and nothing really happened. So there's a risk, right? And so the having the maqasid al-Sharia in mind are very, very important, essential. Without it, it's not a religion, right? It just becomes this fake skeleton of a religion, but we can't use them directly. We cannot use them directly. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the letter of the law, which is how we actually...
So I have a question over here.
Go ahead, Bismillah.
So does that mean that because of the spirit of the law, we could make DNA testing permissible to establish the lineage?
You can do it in certain scenarios. It's relevant sometimes, but it's not always relevant. I'll give you an example. All right, so here we're going to see the conflict later on. The conflict later on is for example, all you did, so you accused your wife of sleeping around, okay? Personally, you had this argument with her, she said, I'm going to do a DNA test. What does that actually mean though in the eyes of the Sharia? It doesn't mean anything. Because lineage, as we're going to see later on in the third category, is part of the court system. So in order for you to negate lineage, it is not simply the fact that you negate DNA. You have to go to the court system. So you have to do what's called public imprecation, right? Which is you have to say certain words, go through a certain legal process to say, this is not my child. And then upon that, you will be separated for good. You will never be together again. So there's a certain process. And if you don't do that, you're going to fall into another legal process, which is called qadf, accusing somebody of adultery without evidence. And so you're either going to go to one pursuit route or another route. right? You're going to go through different things. And so DNA testing is relevant, but it has a certain process in the court. Okay, it has a certain process in the court, and you can't work with it in the just maqasid thing. You can't do that, and it would actually be wrong to do that, right? So inshallah, we'll come to that in a second. That's a good question. Okay, so the letter of the law. So we've just said, I love the spirit's fantastic, but I can't deal with it, right? I can't actually deal with it on a practical level. So we have the Sharia, which is it goes with this higher thing, and it serves those goals, but it is the level that we work with, right? So you're trying to preserve religions. What do you do? Maghrib comes in, pray Maghrib. Okay, well, were you focused? No. I mean, how was the religion preserved then? So, well, in principle, right? I can't, if I just said pray whenever you want or worship however you want, focus on Allah however you want, it's not going to work, right? So we need to have practical things like, did you do this? Did you say this? Did you do these different things? That's what we actually work with, right? What we work with. So it's measurable. You can say he said this word, he didn't say this word. It's here, it's there, and it's tangible, it's objective, but it does fulfill the higher goals. So we're talking about the rules themselves, right? So why is it that wine is forbidden? Wine is forbidden because, it takes away your mind, and if you're drunk, you can't function properly. Okay, well, what if I don't get drunk? Like, what's the big deal? Like, I'm drink 1 tablespoon of wine, am I going to get drunk? I don't get it. So if you say the reason for it being haram to drink wine is because of the preservation of the mind, then that doesn't make sense, because that's not the reason. So that's what we call the hikmah, or the maqsid, right? The thing that's called the hikmah, the wisdom behind it, the thing that we observe, the bigger picture. But what we're actually dealing with is what we call the illah. The illah, the legal reason why you cannot drink wine, is because it is a liquid inebriant, full stop. Or because it's inebriant, or because it's a drug, or because whatever, however you want to define it. So this is the job of the jurist. He sees far over there on the hilltop, he sees the goals, but what he's directly working with is something measurable and tangible. Measurable and tangible, right? And so give an example. Or is it? So for example, prayer times. Did you pray on time? Did you not? Well, what's the point of praying on time? Well, was Allah part of your life or not? So yes, of course Allah's part of my life. Okay, did you pray on time or not? No. Then how is Allah part of your life then? Right? And so I can come along and say, well, Allah's part of my life. I mean, I just delayed the prayer by 5 minutes. Like, what's the problem? Like, it was there the whole time. True. But I can't work with that very nebulous, very vague kind of thing. We have to say pray on time. Right? We can say, of course, like, I genuinely care about, whether or not this is my child or not. Okay, well, here's a witness. Here's 2 male upright witnesses who saw and heard you and Fatima say this word and that word. Now you're married, full stop. Now whoever the child comes from her is both of yours. Very simple. We have these very measurable things. Right? I'm not just talking about the goal as a concept. I'm talking about measurable things, right? The punishment for drinking alcohol. Did you drink this? Did you do this? Right? Now, what if you drank, but you were under that? You drank, but you weren't, I don't know. You weren't that drunk, for example. Like you didn't cause anybody harm. You didn't do anything that was inappropriate. You just sat there in your chair drinking. What's wrong with that? But we're going to have certain outward, clear, measurable things to apply something. Otherwise, we can't deal with it. And the good example is the speeding example, right? Why is it illegal to speed? Well, because you could kill somebody. Okay, what if I don't kill somebody? What if there's nobody on the road? Why is it illegal to drive through a red light? Well, because you could cause a crash. Well, what if it doesn't? What if nobody's there? Right? So here, I'm new to America. One of the funny things here is that in America, right, you can turn right at a red light, right? I found that hilarious. In England, like, you could never do that. Like, it's a red light, you can't turn right. I was in Jordan for 13 years. If there's a red light, you can't just turn right because it's a red light, right? That's the law. But in America, they say, well, at the end of the day, you're turning right. Everyone else is going in the same way. You just look left and see if anybody's there, and you use your discretion, right? So the English mind would say you can't turn right because there is the potential. And we can't deal with whether or not you saw a car coming. You can see whether or not it was red light. And so what we do is we come along and say the speed limit is X. We say we put lights. Was your tire here or was your tire there? Were you speeding? Were you not speeding? Right? Sometimes in court we might have to deal with reckless driving. True. And we have to cover judgment, right? And deal with the maqasid, right? But normally we can just deal with the measure thing. How fast were you going? 100 miles an hour. Okay, this is called speeding. Did you drive? Did you jump the red light or not? Right? And similarly, it's the only way to do analogy. So when I'm doing analogy, I'm saying this is analogous to this. I can't deal with the nebulous thing. I can't say, for example, because there's a potential of mix-up of lineage, it's sinful to be married more than once in your life. Like, I don't understand. I mean, yeah, because imagine if Ahmed and Fatima were married, and then Ahmed divorces Fatima, and Fatima now marries Mustafa, and Mustafa was previously married to Khalida, now Khalida marries Ahmed. So now these two people are now mixed, and then they mix, and they mix, and they mix. Like, I mean, that would mean that every 2 years they divorce each other, marry somebody else, and have all these different kids all over the place. So if I deal just with the general idea, it doesn't really work. And so when I'm doing analogy, I don't look at the general idea. I have my eye on the general idea. It's important. But when I'm dealing with analogy, I'm dealing with the illah. I'm dealing with the illah. So for example, the Shafi scholars, they come along and say, they say, for example, why is wine filthy? Okay, wine is filthy. Okay, what is it about it that we can identify? It is liquid and it's an intoxicant. Okay, so what if you made, for example, marijuana tea? Would it be filthy? Yes. What about marijuana itself? Would it be filthy? No. Okay, is marijuana haram? It's haram, but it's not filthy. Right? Because why? It's not liquid inebriant. Right? So these little things we're going to deal with, right? This and this. Right? And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint something. In fact, it's very hard to pinpoint something. Sometimes we have we have, for example, an illa al-murakkaba, right? Two reasons that come together. Or an illa and its shart, a legal reason and a condition that's tied to it. It's very difficult sometimes to pinpoint something. But that's what the fuqaha do. They pinpoint and they try and say exactly, the jurist, what exactly is the legal reason, the illa, as opposed to the hikmah, the goal, right? The maqsid, right? They look and they're always keeping a kind of like a watch on the maqasid, but they can't deal with them directly. We deal with their illah. So when I say, why is something offensive? Why is something sunnah? Why is something haram? When I'm dealing with fiqh, I'm going to deal with the illah. Okay, when I look at the ethics, I'm going to deal with the hikmah. What is the wisdom behind that? What is the higher goal that's there, right? And so we have to deal with these things. So let's repeat. They have the inner goal, which is what? Worshipping Allah as if you see Him. The outer circle is preserving religion, preserving life, preserving wealth, preserving lineage, sexual decency, and preserving sanity. And then we have the rules themselves that we actually deal with, right? The rules themselves that we actually deal with, okay? So what is the point of fasting? The point of fasting is that you should empty your heart for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, I've done that. No. That's the inner goal. The outer goal is it's Ramadan. So we say, what is the illah? Why do you fast Ramadan? Because it's the month of Ramadan. And here's the moon. I saw it. Measurable. Right? So I can't deal with the spiritual on that level because it's not measurable. So you have to deal with was the new moon born or not? Have you reached puberty? Are you sane? Are you this? Are you that? Okay, now you're obliged to fast. There we go. Right? So that's the difference between the illah and the hikmah. The legal reason and the legal wisdom. What the Sharia is seeking in general and how the Sharia works in specific. Okay.
I have a question over here.
Go ahead.
I'm getting a bit confused between hikmah and the spirit of the law. Are they equivalent?
They're the same thing.
Okay.
Hikmah, ruh al-sharia, maqsid, they're all the same thing. Okay? But this is the two systems that we've just seen. The spirit versus the letter. That's it. Spirit, wisdom, goal, ultimate purpose, ultimate objective. This is all one thing. But the point is, all of these things are nebulous and kind of loose, and I can't deal with them. So I deal with specifics. I can't deal with dangerous I can't deal with risk to life. I can deal with driving through a red light. So you drove through a red light, there that you broke the law. There we go. That's what I can deal with. Okay. So this is just a skeleton. So we do not, when we look at the Islamic ethics, we do not look at Sharia itself. We look at the maqasid, look at the goals, the wisdom. That you may find loopholes. Okay, you may find loopholes because it's a system, and it's just a shell. So the outer shell, you may find certain scenarios where you can do things that are technically okay, but in reality not okay. Okay, and so that's why you have to have something called a dhamir. You have to have something called a conscience, because, you know, for example, divorce. Divorce is offensive, right? It's not haram. So today, Ahmed decides to divorce his wife. It's like standing up and drinking. Yeah, but I mean, aren't you like ruining someone's life and ruining multiple lives? And what's going on there? And so when we look at it from the point of view of the maqasid, it could drive someone insane, it could do this, it could do that. But we just label it as offensive, even though you're driving somebody insane or you're messing someone's life up and all the other things. And so at the end of the day, the whole system is there, right? But when you do on a certain level, it's just going to have one label. Is it halal? Is it haram? Is it sunnah? Is it sinful? What is it, right? And so there, you will find certain things in it that kind of like don't make sense. It doesn't make sense because you're not looking at the whole picture. It doesn't make, because you're not looking at the whole picture, and the person is not looking at the whole system, right? But you have to look at the whole system. Otherwise, it can become unethical, basically. You can do funny things in the Sharia that basically, I mean, you can't really label them properly as unethical, but they are, you know, nigh unethical, right? So you may find loopholes, so that you basically can do something that would result in that would contravene the maqasid of Sharia. And this is where the real jurist has to come in and do something. So someone like myself, who's just an amateur jurist, I'm like, well, it's halal, what's your problem, right? Like, what's your problem? Like, what's the big deal? But somebody who's a real jurist always has those things in mind and says, no, there's a bigger picture here, right? For example, someone comes up to ask me saying, Farid, can I marry somebody and not and have it agreed that I'm not going to support her, right? Like, we don't live together. We don't actually want to have a married life. We just want to make it halal, as they say. And I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, I guess so. But then a real jurist would say, well, hang on a minute. Let's sit down and have a talk here. What's the picture here? What's going on? What's going here? And you're like, no. This is not good, right? Given this background, this system, right? Seeing what's actually going on in the bigger picture. How does it fit with the Sharia, right? And so it must continually be checked against the higher goals and the highest goal. So when you're praying, right? You're praying late. Why are you praying late, Farid? Well, I'm praying late because I'm really tired right now and I want to sleep and get this thought off my mind so that I can focus. For example, the Shafis, they mention that it is offensive to pray when you need to go to the bathroom. Why is it offensive to pray? Because the Sharia says focus in prayer. And the fact that you are now bursting to go to the bathroom, you're not really praying. You're praying, but it's not really praying, right? And so you shouldn't do that. In fact, you shouldn't do that if you need to make a phone call. You're like, I just need to make this phone call and then pray. Okay, Mom, are you okay? Okay, great, fine. Okay, now I'm going to pray Allahu Akbar, right? But so we have to continually check it against the goals. So in principle, praying the earliest of the time should be the best thing. But sometimes there could be priorities in the Sharia, right? And sometimes that's easy and sometimes that's difficult. Okay. Now, how much do you have to check it against the higher goals? This is where we're going to find conflict. Okay. For example, Imam Shafi'i says you have no right to play around with the letter of the law, and you cannot, you can't come along and make up things based on the maqasid of Sharia. Right? You can't do that. For example, the Sharia has clearly forbade interest. Okay, clearly forbade interest. So I need to borrow some money from Atif. He's not interested in lending me some money unless there's some way they can benefit. He's not just going to give me this money. Either he's going to benefit or I'm going to benefit. If he keeps the capital, he can invest it. So if he's going to lend it to me, he's going to lend it to me for some money, right? And he's not interested in doing murabaha or any other kind of halal investment. So what does he do? He says, free to have a trick. I will buy this used envelope. Right? How do Americans pronounce it? Envelope. You guys pronounce it envelope?
Yeah, envelope.
Okay, good.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, I thought it was pronounced another way. My apologies. So you have an envelope.
Envelope. It is also envelope.
Envelope, right? And we say envelope. Okay. Anyway, so envelope. So I'm going to sell you. I need $100,000. Okay. So Atif, I hereby, and I'm not going to say this because just as an example, I hereby sell you this used envelope for $100,000 in cash. Thank you very much. I receive the money in my bank account. Jazakum khair. Now Atif says, I hereby buy it back. And then I say, I hereby buy it back from Atif for 110 to be paid on date X. Okay. Effectively, what have we done?
Charged interest.
Basically, so I got the cash. I owe him, for example, 110,000 to be paid in a year, for example. So was the envelope worth any money? No. Did anybody want it? No. So basically, Farid, you are trying to trick Allah. Okay? You're trying to trick Allah. So what does Imam Shafi say? What does Imam Shafi say? Imam Shafi says, so most scholars forbade that. Most scholars said that is called Bay'ul A'ina, that is haram. Modern, for example, Islamic finance, they've forbidden it. They said that's called Bay'ul A'ina, that is haram. It comes into many, many, many scenarios in fiqh, and that is haram. You're trying to trick Allah. Imam Shafi said, hang on a minute. Where did you get that from? You got that from, you are over applying the spirit of the Sharia. What right have you to create the Sharia from the spirit of the Sharia if Allah SWT hasn't done that? So Imam Shafi says, excuse me, was the first contract halal? Yes. Was the second contract halal? Yes. Okay, how does halal plus halal equal haram? Right? So Imam Shafi is basically saying, listen, there are loopholes. Do not fill in those loopholes. You cannot do that. You are not allowed to do that. That is putting words in Allah's mouth. You're doing something morally wrong. Right? He says, Man istahsana faqad sharra. Whoever kind of comes along and fills in these loopholes is making things halal and haram, just like the pagan Arabs made things halal and haram. Oh, this is halal and this is haram, and God says this, God says that. Where did you get that from? Right? And so Imam Shafi's observation is very important. It's also very dangerous because in reality, Dawood al-Zahiri, a literalist, he read this essay and said that Imam Shafi wrote. He said, every single thing you're saying applies to analogy. If I'm not going to fill in loopholes, I'm not going to work with the Sharia in mind, then I'm not even going to do analogy either. I'm going to say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade X, and X is just like Y, but I don't care. B is not in the Quran, so what's the big deal? Right? What's the relationship between wine and cocaine? Nothing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't forbid cocaine, so therefore it's halal. Right? That's a very dangerous, it's a very important observation because we might overdo that. We might fill in loops that aren't really there, that are important. And it's also a very dangerous observation. So it's an important thing. So how much can we work with this? Right? How much can we work with this? In reality, Imam Shafi himself and the Shafis, they do fill in gaps. They do work with the maqasid, and every great scholar does that in reality. But as a theoretical process, how much can we do? How much are we allowed to do that? And all of us will have been scenarios where you just feel like the reason why the sheikh said it was haram is because he doesn't like it. You know, we've been in scenarios like that. It's just, you're just strict, bro. Like, that's just your culture. You don't like things like that. You've considered that to be weird or strange. So therefore you made it haram. Like, how is that a basis? Right? I've actually literally heard people say that. Oh, that'd be so weird. It must be haram. So how is weird haram? Right? How is weird haram? Not the same thing. Right? And so all of us have been in scenarios where you just kind of get this picture like, oh, everything's haram and everything's because why? Like, where does it even come from? Right? So it doesn't really, it's kind of over filling in loopholes. So this so, you know, do we find loopholes in the Sharia? We do, right? There are some holes. How much can we fill them in? How much can we think for Allah, speak for Allah is an issue, a matter of debate. Everybody does it to some extent. Everybody does it to some extent, but to how much can we do that? Okay, so we have spoken about two systems so far, the spirit that is very essential. That is the ethics of Islam, and then the outward of Islam that serves those things, but we can actually deal with. And now we're talking about the court. So the court is something else. So the court, number one, is a physical thing. There's a person, right? It's between you and other people, not necessarily between you and Allah, right? So the court is, there's a Muslim country, big or small. There is a judge, right? Whether or not there's a physical court, there's a judge. He is either the Muslim ruler who is a scholar, or he himself appoints judges. There's police, there's a legal apparatus to kind of, establish things. And it's enforceable. So this is where jurisprudence, Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, departs from qanun, departs from law. So I can come along and say it is sinful for you to commit zina, but that's not legal. That is a moral statement. That is not a legal statement. Because what is the legality of that? Nothing. Nothing. And there are scenarios like that in divorce, for example, where you'll find somebody, for example, the man says something to his wife, she construes it, or she is absolutely convinced that he said divorce. He denies it and they can't prove it in court. So what happens? Legally, they're married. Morally, they're not. So she's certain this guy's just a liar. He went to court and she couldn't win the case to prove that he actually said the divorce. So then legally she's married, but morally she's not. There are scenarios like that where it can happen, right? And so the point is that which is enforceable and outward, right? Anything that is not enforceable is not law, right? Not law. We can say it's immoral to do many things, but if it's only law because it's enforceable, you can be fined, you can be imprisoned, you can be X, Y, and Z, etc. So the court is a legal thing, right? And it's different to fiqh, because fiqh is ultimately morals, and that's why certain people looking at morals and ethics would look at halal and haram as ethics. It is an ethics, but it's an ethical system. But law is different, right? Law is different. And it's not necessarily even a moral issue at all. For example, I am an Ottoman judge, okay? Or better example, I am a Shi'i judge in what's it called? In what's the word? Safavid, Iran, okay? Two Zoroastrians come to court having never heard of Islam in their life. They actually don't know about Islam. They don't know about Islam. So they are not actually morally responsible. They are not more responsible for Allah. Okay? They cannot speak my own language, but I, as the Safavid Qadi, judge, I'm in charge of them because they're under my jurisdiction. And I judge between them. So there's actually no morality involved whatsoever. There's nothing moral about it. It's just a worldly system that is moral in that I, as a judge, have to feel my moral responsibility to Allah to do that true. I am doing a moral function. But what actually happened there was not actually a moral issue. Neither of them, there was nothing moral about it, meaning it's not good or bad. When I say not moral, I don't mean bad. I mean, there was nothing to do with their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not even speaking to them and asking them to do anything, because he hasn't even made the message reach them. They've never heard about Islam. They don't know anything about Islam. They don't know what about the Prophet. They don't know about anything. All they know is there's a court 200 miles away from our village, and they just go there. They don't even know what it means, anything. And so the court is a worldly system that we worship Allah with, but it is not the same as the maqasid al-sharia, although it serves the maqasid al-sharia, it serves those goals. And it is not actually the same as fiqh. Fiqh, they're not the same thing, right? Because fiqh is only law when it can be applied. So what if there were no Muslim countries? Then there would be no Islamic law, because there's nothing to be applied. So I can write as much as I want that this is considered apostasy and this person should be executed for apostasy. You can say whatever you want, but if they don't apply it, it doesn't mean anything. That's not law, right? So the difference between a fatwa and qada, okay? So a practical thing, I am in Jordan. I am in Jordan. I go to the Fatwa department, which is fiqh, and I say, I said X, Y, and Z to my wife. Is this considered a divorce? They say, they write it out. This is considered a divorce. Morally, before Allah, I am that person who said that is divorced from his wife. Okay, but is he legally divorced from his wife? No, because he hasn't gone to court yet to get it ratified. So now he's actually separated. Now he dies, his wife doesn't get inheritance, right? But otherwise he would, right? So it's two different things, right? Similarly, you're a Muslim in that you have read the Quran and you believe in it, but you've never given the Shahada. So now you want to marry my daughter. You can't. Why? Because we haven't proven legally that you're a Muslim. Legally, you're not a Muslim. So you can't marry her because the court can't marry you because you're not legally a Muslim. You haven't done the Shahada. Or the opposite. You don't care about Islam, but you come and give the Shahada. Okay, we get married then. Right? So it's a legal function, a legal system. So it's not necessarily even to do with morality, because there might be the two people involved, they're not even morally responsible, right? But it is a system that we have to establish, right? And it can also sometimes be quote unquote immoral, because, and I give the example here. Give the example of the Prophet himself saying this. He said, so whomever I judge to receive the right of his brother, let him know that I am only cutting off for him a piece of hellfire. So the Prophet said himself, as a judge between you, it may well be that I get the judgment wrong. So what I'm actually saying is actually immoral. So I'm saying Atif has to give Fahad this much money, and it's not fair. It's not actually justice. Yeah, but you do have to apply it. Okay, and there are scenarios, for example, where you might know somebody is a liar, but you don't have any evidence. So I know Atif is a card-carrying liar. He's a card-carrying hypocrite liar, and he does this every single year. But I have no evidence of that. I can feel it in my heart. That's irrelevant in the court, right? Irrelevant in the court. So that's relevant, for example, in where? In fiqh. I'll give you another example. Can you establish the new moon with the testimony of a fasiq, of somebody who isn't religious? No. So as the qadi, as the chief justice of whatever, some Muslim country, as a legal process, you come to me and say, you're right, honorable, your honor, I have seen the new moon. And I say, where is the evidence that evidence says this person is corrupt? I am not morally, as a system, I can't establish the new moon for my jurisdiction. However, I have to fast tomorrow if I believe you. Can you see that difference? Morally, in the fiqh, I believe you. You don't pray, for example, but I know you don't lie about Ramadan. So I believe you, but as a legal system, I cannot confirm your witness because you're not an upright witness. So it's meaningless in the court. So I believe you, and I'm going to fast tomorrow with you, but I cannot sign it off because, And so that's the case. The judge might believe something. I know you're speaking the truth, but you have no evidence. So what am I going to do about it? I know Atif is speaking the truth, but he has no evidence. What am I going to do about it? So it's not a moral issue. It's a legal issue. There's a certain process you have to follow, right? Another example is what? Another example is, what is it? The woman who committed adultery at the time of the Prophet, right? Who was stoned to death. And then the Prophet makes dua for her. And then they say, Ya Rasulullah, why are you making dua for a zaniya, a woman who committed adultery? And she was stoned to death for adultery. So because she was a very good person who made tawbah, right? So she's a good person. She was not obliged. She didn't have to come to court. She chose of her own will to come to court. And the Prophet said, have you seen anything greater than sacrificing yourself for Allah? And if she repented, a repentance were to be divided among 70 men of Medina, it would be enough for all of them. So she's one of the great awliya of Allah, yet she was executed. How? Because her standing with Allah is one thing, the process that we have to apply is something else. They're not the same thing, right? They're not the same thing. So the fact that I know you're speaking the truth doesn't mean that I have to judge in your favor. They're not the same thing, okay? So inshallah, that makes some sense. So it's a purely, so the hypocrite again. So a hypocrite. My Moroccan friend, my Moroccan cousin is dating this guy from France. They want to get married, and they can't. So the guy just says, okay, well, what do I have to do to get married? I just say the shahada. Okay, great. So he's a hypocrite. He's a munafiq. He's not actually a believer. But just to get married, he said the shahada. Okay, if you say the shahada, you're a believer. End of story. Right? And so legally, your label is X or label is Y. Right? And so this is.
I have a question over here.
Go ahead, yeah.
So you hear in the United States, you're not allowed to have multiple wives.
Correct.
So you hear about in cases, and even in Canada, so you hear about cases where you hear about, a Muslim man who has two wives. One is a legally registered marriage, and the other one is performed in the mosque. So the community knows about it, but it's unregistered.
Mm-hmm.
So legally, he's not married. But what's the implication?
Legally, he's not married, meaning, yeah, legally, yeah. So that's another issue, is that that's another issue. So here we really, when we talk about whether this is halal haram, we're going to look at what are the repercussions and how realistic are those repercussions. Okay. So for example, how realistic is it that she would be barred from certain rights that she's guaranteed as a wife? How is that? So we would judge different place and time on that issue. And we might say in certain scenarios, this is just immoral because you are getting into a relationship that you cannot be fair, because immediately one is registered as your wife, one isn't. You're immediately being unfair, and so you are guaranteeing unfairness. So we might do it like that. And other scenarios might be very different, given place and time, right? So here that is it might be relevant. So for example, my marriage, I got married here, okay, by Imam Zaid, right? That means nothing. So Imam Zaid married me to my wife in someone's house, okay? Witnesses and everything. That means nothing in US law, and also means nothing in Jordanian law. So Jordanian law is an Islamic system. We're going to go to an Islamic court for marriage. What am I going to produce? I'm going to produce my marriage certificate from Contra Costa. Right? That's what I'm going to produce. And they're going to have me do an official translation of it from Arabic, from English into Arabic. That's what they're actually going to recognize. So is it relevant? Is it not relevant? It is important. Similar kind of thing, the shahada. So I remember my mum, my parents are divorced. So my mum got married in Jordan to an American. To prove that he was Muslim, it was not sufficient. They did not simply accept the fact that he did the shahada. That wasn't sufficient. So he's got a beard, he prays, that wasn't actually sufficient. In their legal process, they actually wanted a certificate from Azhar or something like that, right? So yes, some of these things can be relevant, right? So let's say, for example, he's a Jordanian. Again, just because I was from Jordan, he's a Jordanian. He comes to America and gets married legally. Okay, then he gets a second wife in the mosque. Okay, then he goes back to Jordan and dies. Who inherits the money? His actual wife, his legal wife, because in the system it's going to work like that. So here, we're gonna ask the question: is that even halal, given that you're going to result in X, Y, and Z, right? In Jordan, for example, as well, it is illegal to have a marriage in the mosque or at your house. It's illegal. Can't even do that. Right. So here, why I mention Jordan is because it is an Islamic law, one of many applications in process. It is actually a real thing, not just kind of theory, right? As opposed to jurisprudence. You might come and ask me, as a faqih, is this halal? Is this haram? Right? Whereas we're talking about, is this valid or is this invalid? What are the repercussions, right? But generally speaking, the whole thing about the second marriage has a lot of question marks around it. There's many things to question there. So here's, for example, a quote from Ibn Abdul Barr in the Tamheed. He says, they have reached unanimity that court rulings are only based on outward evidence. We're not talking about morality. We're talking about things we're dealing with. Testimony, this, he said that. So a good example. Somebody says to their wife, they say, this is not an example. They say these words, right? And they say X, Y, and Z. You say, did you intend divorce? No. But did you intend to say the words? Yes. Did you know what they meant? Yes. It's a divorce, right? Marriage, the same thing. I say, for example, I hereby marry my daughter Habiba Dingle to Khalid so and so, and he says, I hereby accept the marriage. Did you intend marriage? No, I don't care if you intended marriage or not. That's irrelevant. That's between you and Allah. What was your intention? What was your presence of heart? That's irrelevant. I care what you said. That's all. That's how it works. We don't even really care if you're a Muslim or not. We care if you have said the Shahada, because that's how that's working. So we have these three very, very different systems. Very, very different systems. They go hand in hand and they are important. They go hand in hand and they are important. But the inner reality is left to Allah, right? So we have to understand these three systems that are happening in tandem. Three separate systems, okay? And we're going to give examples here of, so what is it? The court is that which is enforceable. It's purely legal. It's not necessarily even a moral issue, and it's not necessarily even justice. Okay, as an example of the Prophet himself. The Prophet himself could not guarantee justice. Can't guarantee it. Because I'm a human being. You come to me, he said this, he said this. This is the evidence we had. There are no witnesses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know that you're speaking the truth because I know you personally, but that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. Right? So for example, the scenario, Atif steals my car. He steals my car. For example, I bought a car in Atif's name because for whatever reason, he just doesn't give it to me. That's it. So I paid everything. It's mine. You all know it's mine, but where's the evidence? It's in his name. You don't show up as witnesses. What evidence do I have? So I'm going to claim in court that Atif stole my car that for somehow or some reason was in his name. Where's your evidence, Farid? So all we're going to ask Atif to do is say, swear by Allah that it's his, and that's it. Gets away with it. And the court can see with in his eyes that Atif is lying. He's lying. Right? Well, what do you do? Right? Can you all remember the film Liar Liar? Jim Carrey? Can you remember that? So that he defends an adulterous wife in the beginning and uses all these little systems in the law to basically claim that she this, and he knows she cheated on her husband. The jury, everybody knows about it, but like, what are you gonna do about it? Nothing. Because there's a system, right? And so sometimes the system is off and needs to be changed, or sometimes that's just the Sharia. Right? That's just what happened. 1, 2, 3, 5. You have to apply it like that. Right? And that's it. You worship Allah by applying the Sharia. And part of applying the Sharia is this outward legal system. It is important. So we have the legal system itself, which is applicable, Muslim country, etc. Then we have fiqh, jurisprudence. Then we have the ruh of the Sharia. One whole picture. One holistic picture. So then we can look at conflicts in the system. I apologize for going over today. It's all Atif's fault. I'm joking. Conflicts between, for example, goals. So the Sharia wants to keep you alive. The Sharia wants to keep you praying. So what do I do when I have only enough water to drink? And if I was to make, well, do I die of thirst? What do I do? Make tayammum. So here we can see life has been given precedence over religion on a certain level. Right? Life has been given precedence over religion on a certain level. Blasphemy at gunpoint. I put a gun to your head and I say, curse the Prophet or I'll shoot you. You are allowed to curse the Prophet. Right? You're allowed to. You're not obliged to, but you're allowed to. Okay, so that's the scenario of life given precedence over religion. Are you allowed to leave Islam? Like I say, if you don't, I want you to leave Islam in your own heart. No, you can't do that. Right, you can't do that. Hajj by sea, apologize, typo here, right? C with an A. Hajj by sea. Am I obliged to go on Hajj by sea? So we're going to say, listen, you're going to leave from New York on a Viking ship, go all the way up to Greenland, come down on a tempestuous sea. What is the likelihood of you getting there? 90%. Okay, go. You're obliged to go. Okay, but I might die. Yeah, I know, but it's a negligible. What if it's 50-50? You're not obliged to go anymore. Right? So religion was given precedence over life when it was not much of a risk. But when it's a genuine risk, you're not obliged to go anymore. Another scenario: wealth versus religion. So you have to pray. You have to pray, and in order to pray, you have to have water. In order to water, you have to buy water. How much does water cost in the middle of the Arizona desert? $100 per liter. Okay, are you obliged to buy water? No, because that's extortionate. So you're not obliged to any 1 penny over the normal price for water in that area. You're not obliged to pay. You just make tayammum. So therefore, dry wudu was taken over. Religion came second to wealth. Hajj, right? I do not have the money to support myself and to support my family if I go on Hajj. Okay, don't go on Hajj. Okay, you do have enough money, but I don't have enough money to save. You have to go on Hajj. If I went on Hajj, I'd have to sell my house. You're not obliged to go on Hajj. If I went on Hajj, I have to sell my second house. You are obliged to go on Hajj. Okay, and so here we can see some conflicts between the goals, right? Wealth and religion, life and lineage. Okay, in a scenario of rape, may Allah protect us all. In a scenario of rape, if they put a gun to your head, they say, if you move, if you shout, we will shoot you. Okay, you have to shout. You can't just let someone rape you or rape anybody else. They say you can't even let somebody rape somebody who is a kafir harbi, somebody who is a disbeliever who is in the middle of a war zone fighting Muslims. You cannot allow them to be raped. Rape cannot happen, full stop. Okay, cannot happen. So if you are being raped, may Allah protect us all, or someone is going to be raped, life becomes lineage here takes precedence over life. Okay, so if it means you're going to die, you're going to die. That's it. Okay, here's a conflict there. A woman escaping non-Muslims. So by default, for the sake of lineage and other things, women by default are not allowed to travel alone. Okay, particularly when it's dangerous. Okay, so now here's a woman. She's going to walk in the middle of nowhere, running away from non-Muslims who have captured her in war, for example. Right. So does she stay in this prison, a non-Muslim prison, or does she escape and walk across the wilderness that she could be, anything could happen to her? So there is a risk for her lineage. Somebody could rape her, for example. Yeah, but where she is worse. So there's a conflict. Life with a lineage. Right? So there's a conflict there. Life and sanity, right? For example, contraception. Why is contraception sometimes the best thing to do? You say, well, if you have another baby, I'm literally going to lose it. Literally going to lose it. So life here meaning life of the next generation, right? So if everybody on the face of the earth used contraception, there'll be no life, right? Right. But so that's something else. But we're saying on an individual level, contraception isn't that bad, is no longer offensive if it means staying married, if it means staying sane, and other, for example, more important things. So here, for example, we said to keep sane, and which does risk life in the long run, contraception could be obligatory. Anesthesia, you are losing your sanity, you're not conscious anymore in order to stay alive or in order to not suffer excruciating pain. Right? So we can see conflicts sometimes occur and we can solve them, usually. Sometimes we can't, and sometimes we'll have different opinion. Right? For example, sometimes in one particular issue. So if you are going to pray, but the only way you could pray and cover your awrah is to pray in filthy clothes. So you have no water to purify anything. Do you pray naked or do you pray in filthy clothes? Here there's a conflict, right? Conflict of the same nature. So it is of the interests of the prayer, which goes with religion, to pray with pure clothes. It's also interests of the prayer to respect Allah by covering your awrah. So where does the respect? Where is the priority there? Conflict. So generally speaking, though, when something is categorically or when categorically or very likely, then the rule changes. So whenever there is a genuine risk to your life, the halal becomes haram. That's the principle ad-daruratu tubihu al-mahdhurat, as I mentioned last week. Whenever there's a genuine risk to life, a genuine risk to property, a genuine risk to religion, then rules change. Rules change, right? For example, tayammum. Why is it okay to pray without wudu? Well, because if I use the water, I die. Right. Another scenario: praying with closed eyes. Right. So not all the scholars don't agree with this necessarily, but Imam Nawawi, for example, the Shafis, he said that if you were to pray and with your eyes open, you're very distracted because of all the different things in front of you, And were you to close your eyes, you would have more khushu'. Then the khushu', the humbleness in prayer, takes precedence over fulfilling the sunnah of praying as the Prophet told us to pray. I can see that that's a bit of a problem if you think about it, right? So the goal of the Sharia is to have presence of heart and prayer. The form of the Sharia is to pray as the Prophet prayed. So here I'm actually going to go against the Sunnah, close my eyes, even though that's not what the Prophet did, in order to preserve the khushu' in prayer. Right? And there are many examples like that as well. Certain Shafis had the same opinion. They said, can you sit down in prayer if you are in pain? I said, well, what kind of pain? If it's excruciating pain that would allow you to make tayammum, yes, because that's a darura. But if it's a minor pain, then no. Other Shafis said, no. The point of the prayer is presence of heart. So if the kind of awkwardness or pain distracts you in prayer, then you can sit down. Right? You can see the different ways of looking. Right? So here there's an issue of dealing with conflict. Certain scholars looked at it as it has to be a physical, kind of a life-threatening thing that allows you to sit down and pray. Others said, no, looked at the goal of the Sharia. And we're going to see this time and time again in fiqh. Right? When you study fiqh, we see it time and time again. Half of fiqh is these conflicts. Right? And so juggling three systems. We've spoken about this. We're going to mention it again, juggling these three systems. So for example, number versus quality. Right? What's more important? Should I fast more or should I fast less? So, well, you asked the faqih, is it better to fast Monday and Thursday, or is it better to fast just Monday? So, well, simple. Of course, there's more reward. 2 days is better than one. What's your problem? Okay, what if I hate fasting? It's turning me away from the deen. Right? Personally, I find that when I fast twice a week, it's better than fasting every other day, personally. And so quality sometimes, when we put the three systems together, is more important. Should I pray 20 rakats or 2? Sometimes it's better to pray 2 than 20, given many things, right? When we look at the whole system, it sometimes gives us different pictures, right? And so fiqh, when we study jurisprudence itself, is very two-dimensional. And it gives you just one angle of things. It doesn't give you the whole picture. Marriage, you say it is recommended for someone to get married when they have enough money and they're interested in getting married. Okay, that's it. That means a 16-year-old who's a millionaire go get married. Yallah. So, well, is it good for a 16-year-old to get married? Maybe he should wait a while. Maybe he'll ruin his life by getting married, right? So the other side, the bigger picture, is very important too. We won't see that necessarily in a book like that we had having you reading, right? The book on, here's a fiqh according to madhahib. It's not usually there. We don't usually talk about these things, but they're relevant, right? The polygamy, right? It is sunnah to have as many children as possible and therefore get married as much as possible. So we're like, okay, 4 wives would be better than 2. 2 is better than 1, right? So, well, are you married? Like, do you have 4 marriages? Like they're called Islamic marriages, or do you have 4 halal relationships, right? Do you have children that are happy, or do you have children that are born in hell, right? So is it number versus quality? Again, in the fiqh book, they're just going to talk about how many children, how many this, because they can deal with what's measurable, but there's certain things that you're going to have to look at in another angle, right? And so somebody comes along and they can make a very inhumane and weird system out of just fiqh, because it doesn't necessarily see the whole picture. Rights, morals versus court, right? So I am renting my car to Atif day by day. I have a right to, I am not bound to rent him the next day. I don't have to do that. Right? But he needs it tomorrow. Okay, well, I don't care. My right, my Sharia right, is that I'm renting him day by day and I don't want to rent it to him tomorrow. Okay, do you need it tomorrow? No. Okay, so is that halal or haram? It's halal. Right? Morals, be a moral person. Think about what the other person needs. Be a neighbor, right? He needs the car tomorrow. He doesn't have another car. He can't afford to buy a car. Rent the car to him, right? As opposed to court. Court doesn't even care about any of those things. That's irrelevant. I mean, the judge himself, of course, he cares in his heart, but you present to the court the scenario. Well, how relevant is any of this? We're going to say, was it a contract or was it not a contract? This, that. That's what we're going to deal with. It's not the same thing. Your rights and obligations. It is my right as a husband that my wife sleeps with me, for example. Okay, well, what if she doesn't want to? Because you hurt her feelings. Okay, well, I'm going to take her to court and say, today you don't get food. Right? Of course you can do that. Right? Of course you can do that. That's how it worked. But, you know, she's like, so the court asked her, did she refuse? Did she not refuse? Like, yeah, but where's the deen for it? Like, that's just weird. So there's rights and there's morals and then there's the court. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. Right? And so we have to put the whole picture together. So sometimes we're going to come along and look at the court for morality or look at the rights for morality. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Right? They're not the same thing. So when you come along saying Muslims believe that you should stone good people to death. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ praised this woman, but yet stoned her to death. Like three different systems. These are three things that are happening in tandem. They're all very important. They're happening in tandem. We don't work, and the whole things work together. They are all important. They are all important. Right? Literally, for example, somebody got married and his wife didn't even turn up ever, and she went off on to holiday, never came, and then she demanded 5 years of what's it called, nafaqah, of her financial support. You say, well, hang on a minute, she wasn't even in the house. Okay, well, she left the house with permission? No. She just disappeared for 5 years, and now she's asking for money for all of those years. Okay, it's relevant then, right? And so yes, we see morality in the court, but the court isn't necessarily always moral. It's not always the same thing, right? And so we have to have these three systems. They have to work, but they are not the same thing. And so to judge the court from one angle or judge the outward sharia from one angle, it doesn't make sense. You have to look at the three in tandem. They're working in tandem. You have to look at the three in tandem, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Apologize, we're going quite a long time today. Some people have given up. Atif, Fahima, Tariq.
I mean, it makes sense. It's just that normally people play around with that because everybody cares about the court. No, people don't care about the
but they are
rights of the court.
So then they come along and say, well, I'm allowed to do this in court. Yeah, you're allowed to do that. What happens when you stand before the judge? When you stand before the judge, what's Allah going to say to you? All three are relevant. All three are relevant. And so you can't ignore them. So when you stand before the court, that's something else, right? When you ask the fiqh ruling, is it halal, haram in itself? That's one thing. Talking about the morals, that's something else. Three things that work in tandem. So as a practicing Muslim, all of these things come together. When you're talking about your trade, when you're talking about dealing with people, all of these things come together as one system, one juggling act, right? One juggling act. Okay, and so yeah, so if people who just care about the court, it is important, and we apply the court as it is. But when they stand before the judge, and we talk about Islam as it actually is before Allah's eyes, it's something else. Okay, so other scenarios here, marital rights, as we mentioned, right? What your right is before the court, what something else. You know, I'll give you a good example here. Based on certain legal evidence, or rather, you find in the books of fiqh, they'll say that the wife has a right to be slept with once in her marriage. Wow. That's quite amazing. Once. Okay, what's the evidence? Why? Because on the judge, if he is impotent, meaning he cannot have an erection, they got married and he could never have an erection ever, then what does she do? She raises the issue to court and he's given 1 year. Okay, so what happens if they have relations in that year? Then she shouldn't have that right anymore. So based on that, the legal in front of the court, she has a right once in her life, right? That's what's once in her life. But in reality, that's you're talking about in a legal structure. Okay, well, what about in a moral structure? Something else. That's completely different, right? So what is morally right and morally wrong, Islamically before Allah, is not the same as with the rights you get in court. They're not the same thing. So people come along and say, well, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said this is what Islam says. No, it doesn't. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Because why are you looking at three independent systems that are different? So let's re-ask the question then. So are you saying that morally a woman has more right than that? Of course. Okay, but does she have a right to that before the court? Not necessarily. So she might not be able to get access to that before the court, true. So the guy he's not interested in sleeping with her, not interested. What can the court do? The court said, did he ever sleep with you? Did he say anything like he's not going to sleep with you? No. What's the court going to do? Even in Western law, you cannot force people to do things like that. You can't force a person, for example, to perform on stage. You're going to do force them. What are you going to do? It's not enforceable, is it? Right? Now, certain legal systems, they may allow you, for example, to say that he's called ithbat darar, to prove that she's being harmed, maybe, right, as a legal process. But generally speaking, you're jumping from two systems, right? Jumping two systems, or vice versa. The fact that I could say she left the house without my permission, and that means I don't have to support her. Okay, well, why did she leave the house without your permission? Because you broke her heart. Does Allah not care about the fact that you broke your heart? Of course. Does the court care about the fact that you broke her heart? No, the court does not care about that. It's irrelevant. That has nothing to do with the process. So she left to her parents' house for 2 weeks. I'm not going to pay rent. I'm not going to pay for food. And then she asked 10 years later, she's now trying to get that money. The court's going to say, no, she left without permission. Keep her freed. Why did she leave? Because she broke her heart on purpose. Does Allah care about that? Of course. But the court doesn't care about that. It's irrelevant. And the court, it would be immoral for the judge to say you have to pay that nafaqah for those 2 weeks. You can't do that because she left the house without your permission. What do you want more than that? We spoke about divorce, and we give the example of what's called mas'alat al-tadyin, the scenario between when morally somebody is divorced, but legally they're not, right? The case of adultery, we mentioned that for example, morally someone can be an adulterer, but it's not established before the courts, and then they're not, right? And so there's two different things. The death penalty for the innocent, right? The classic scenario is what? Hallaj, a great Sufi Hallaj, who said that he was Allah. So there's this person who is a very, very spiritual person. He says that he is Allah. He says that he is Allah. Okay, are you sane? You're sane. Did you intentionally say these words? Yes. Okay, this is apostasy. This is called apostasy. So if you do not, you have 3 days to repent and reject that statement. We ask you in 3 days, what do you say? Are you al-haq? Are you the truth? Are you capital T? Yes. Okay, that you've left Islam then. So he was executed. A innocent, righteous person is executed for apostasy. How? Because that's what we have to apply. His own students signed it off. Why? Because you have to apply the Sharia. Why on earth did he say that? I don't know. That's between him and Allah. Do you think he really left Islam? No. But he said it. That happened. We have to apply the law. Same thing with Sa'idiyya, the woman who committed adultery. The Prophet praises her. Yeah, she has a death penalty. Why? Two different systems. The convert that never says the Shahada, or is never heard to hear the Shahada, so he's not a Muslim. He can't marry or inherit from a Muslim, and vice versa. The person who's a convert is actually not even, he converts in front of the court, but he's not actually a Muslim, right? So these systems exist. And what's the clearest example? How the Prophet ﷺ dealt with the munafiqeen. There were munafiqeen, people the Prophet ﷺ knew with his own mind that they were not believers, but they dealt with them as if they're believers, right? They dealt with them as believers, right? So that's the same thing. That's on a legal/military level. You can't kill them, even though they're trying to kill you, because there's two different systems. Okay, is that clear, inshallah?
Yes.
Inshallah. Fahima, any questions? Tariq, any questions?
Good. Jazakallah khair.
So it's very important. It's very important when you say this is how Islam works. On which level are you talking about? Ultimately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking at our hearts, and everything ultimately goes to our hearts. But there are certain things that outwardly they might come out in another way. Allahu a'lam. Jazakumullah khair wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Subhanallah wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank